perspective, folks. I hope y'all are doing well in the midst of everything that is still going on in the world. Lyzeth and I are back to give you another episode, which really stems from a previous episode where we touched on a little bit around nonprofits. So as Lyzeth and I have both mentioned in previous episodes, both her and I work for nonprofits. And so, we really wanted to take a few episodes, so more than just this one, kind of talking about nonprofits. And so really what we just going to spend some time, the next few minutes or so, is really Googling, like, what is nonprofits? Like, what is it? Like, how do they come about? How did we get here? Why is the government involved? Why is the government not involved? Yeah. So just, bear with us and come along for the ride.
Yeah, this is a new thing we're gonna try out. We actually were just talking before we started recording, and then we were like, how about we just record each other talking about it? Because we were having some really interesting conversation and dialogue, and so bear with us. We're gonna try something new. See if you want to join us in this educational journey for both of us. Because like I've been working in nonprofit over like almost 10 years, and I never really took a moment to really learn about the history of nonprofits or how they came about. And I think what's been interesting for Martina and I is the relationship between government and nonprofits,
or the lack thereof.
and the lack of, maybe. And if you watched our previous episode, or our last episode before this one, we delved a little bit into it and really understanding, like, why can't the government do some of the things that nonprofits are doing, particularly when it comes a lot to like community voice, getting ideas from the community, these community plans. Chicago has these community plans that an organization creates and works with community to do. And it just seems like that would be something that the city government would take a lead on, having these conversations with community. Like, we have aldermen, right?
Exactly.
Like, couldn't the aldermen like host these kind of conversations work with some?
That's a good question, Lyzeth. Why? Oh, girl. Okay, go ahead. I was about to get into something else. I'm gonna let you finish your statement. You know me. Go ahead.
I know. Well, I'll just finish this, because I was gonna say, like, why could the aldermen also just bring some of the nonprofits that are in their ward together to start the dialogue, start the planning process, so that it gets communicated back to the city? Like, shouldn't there be like a flow from like community through the aldermen to the city, and informing and influencing in that way? But that's just where my brain is at. So Martina, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say, because you could get, as you mentioned, we have these community plans that lay out the quality of life plans for pretty much, I think, almost every neighborhood in Chicago, not just South and West Side, but like North Side as well. But the government doesn't consider it an official document that they would use to help them really understand community, streamline, provide better services for the community. And so, listen, when you said that, I was like, about the aldermen, why don't aldermen, who play a really big role here in Chicago in many ways, work with the city of Chicago to try to implement these more? That's such a good question. Because it often wonders. I know I'm gonna just say it, some people think aldermen are BS, depending, I guess. And they could be, depending on your community and your neighborhood.
Yeah.
But that's a good alderman.
What ward you live in.
Yeah, or the ward that you're in. But that's such a good question. I had not thought about that. Why don't aldermen, alderwomen, alder people do that? Like, try to actively make these quality of life plans? Because it's almost like, so this organization that we know that does that, then what's the purpose? Like, why do they have a job? Like, if that's what they're doing.
Because then my understanding is then you have to seek the funding to make some of these projects happen. And it's like, well, why couldn't we have budgets? Like, where do these, like, it's all this like connectedness, like this spider web of things that could be working together, but don't. And disclaimer, like, I don't know all this knowledge. I don't know a lot of the inner workings of an alder person and our city government. That was not my role or anything, but it's just an understanding, like, how can they make it happen? How can you make your alder person be that? Why can't alderperson work with the organization? Does it have to do with something with rules and regulations that exist for nonprofits or organizations that doesn't allow them to engage, government into this process? Because as we were Googling, we noticed that there was a lot of rules and regulations when it comes from that the IRS has, and these things, and you lose funding if you or you lose your exempt status if you do something, particularly when you're lobbying government. But it's just fascinating to me to just talk about this, and it's a topic that I know Martina have been having conversation about and wanting to dig into it.
Okay,
But
so
one of the things,
yeah, I think you about to say what I what I think you are.
I'll let you take it.
Okay, I was going to talk about, so we were looking at like the founding of nonprofits. How did we get here? So it seems like from like Lyzeth was like, working her magic on the computer, and it was like, didn't you say like it was the YMCA, right, that kicked it off?
Yeah. It was like the first kind of I guess like funding or like sort of charitable campaign that kind of kicked it off, at least here in the US, was what I was reading. And I'm trying to find this article I was reading. I opened up a bunch. Does it ever happen to y'all where you open like a bunch of tabs?
The rabbit hole.
Peak, and you lose your
was it the
spot.
website you were saying me, the nonprofits and governments, a mutually dependent relationship? Is that the one?
No,
okay.
I found it. It said started on like the 1900s, so like the 1920s is where they're looking at. And actually it was 1889.
Damn.
Was, I don't know if this was like YMCA or that year, but it was saying that it was brought on by Andrew Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth, which I've heard about. I read, the only reason I've heard about it is because I was reading that what is her name? Susan Cain's book about introverts, and she talks about it. About the
yes. I was like, Carnegie, the old white man. I mean, I know that's about what I know about him.
And in his idea of like prospering and getting money, he talked about it's a duty for society to sort of give back, so to like donate to causes, and then and then it goes on to say a cause that many found important was the YMCA, and apparently they had been around for years, but then in the 1900s, it's when they saw like the first, I guess, like big fundraising campaign, and it's just gone on like that until today. I mean, you see all these fundraising campaigns that come through. I remember like the bucket challenge was a big thing.
Oh Lord, is that what people are like pouring water on themselves?
Yeah,
I have heard water. I've heard negative things about that. People who are actually from the is it ASL? ALS. Excuse me for mispronouncing that. Yeah, I've heard like things around people who actually have that condition, and like, I guess it's, thank you for doing it, but also at the same time, it's like, it's not necessary. But thank you for wanting to pour water on yourself, Okay.
I mean, this will probably go into a completely different video that we can talk about in the future, is the role of social media and nonprofits and the fundraising, because it has become such a big thing. So guys, keep an eye out for that video. We'll probably do it. I already typed in my notes that that's a topic we'll talk about.
And I think I bring other than that, I think anyone else, because as we're on this journey too, we are in the nonprofit sector, but also comment as well. If anybody has like any really good books or articles around knowledge around this, I know Lyzeth and I probably know a few ourselves that we could probably end up talking about. But again, like, please comment or make suggestions on things. As we had a comment one time that said that we were ignorant. So we don't want to be ignorant. We want to be informed. So if you can help us be informed about any of the topics that we're talking about, in a respectful manner, that would be great. But yeah, I am always looking to learn something. I obviously don't know everything. So thank you anyone for who can provide additional information. Okay.
I think it's fascinating. One of the articles that I was sharing with Martina had the title like "What's the purpose of nonprofit organizations?" and that article has a lot of information. It goes from like that article to another one,
I
and I
remember
guess
that one.
and like the basis of it was really they can exist for a bunch of purposes, but it's mainly for really having a common purpose that isn't about, I guess, lining their like whoever founds the nonprofit, like it's not to line their pockets with money, and it's also not to uh, or their donors or funders. Like it's not raised not to like gain more money, but it's about like really like about a mission, right? Like you have a mission, you're gonna have a board of directors. What's interesting, it does allow you to pay for employees, so that's why you see nonprofits are able to put a portion of their funds that they raise to pay employees. But I just like think about that all the time, where it's like, okay, and you do hear this a lot. Like I've heard it through my career that you don't go to nonprofit to get rich. You're not gonna.
Ain't that the truth? Oh.
And you don't start a nonprofit to get rich. You start a nonprofit because you really want to help your community. You want to give back to to some kind of thing that's important to you. Whether it could be an illness or something that you want to tackle or bring awareness to. So that's the biggest thing. But with starting, and then when you get in, because it was like, I think the article is like, all charities are nonprofits, but not all nonprofits are 501c3s, which means they're not tax exempt.
Right.
And I was like, that is fascinating, because in my head, people use charities and nonprofits interchangeably. And I hear it like, it's the same thing, but it really isn't, which is just fascinating as well, to kind of hear that and to just dig in. But to like our original question, like if there's rules and regulations that our government has about being tax exempt and like what is all that, are there rules and regulations around how a nonprofit can or maybe it's reverse, how the government can interact with the nonprofit, or how to work, to our earlier comment about aldermen or alder people kind of becoming involved in that planning process and that community planning process as well.
And I see here, I think what I was reading you earlier, it says overall, 80% of every dollar of nonprofit revenue in the United States comes from government grants or contracts or service or fees, which, I mean, we know that to a certain extent. And I guess, that's really my issue in terms of the larger picture here. Why can't the government do the things that nonprofits do? Now, not all of them, as it says, just saying, we got nonprofits out there because unfortunately someone may have lost their leg. And so now they are part of, they have created a 501c3 that focuses on people who do not have limbs. Now that may not directly be connected to the government, but I think I'm more thinking of like the social services. And that just seems where we just have so many nonprofits. It's just overly saturated with social services being in the nonprofit world. And you think you had made a point. I think you were talking about small government. And that's what I was like, well, Republicans are not going to allow for that. They don't want that big government. They don't want people to come there and try to help people and provide adequate services. That'd be too much like right. So I think, to me, until I can find more knowledge around this, I feel that's probably a primary reason why governments do not participate more in social services, because plenty of Republicans and conservatives think that the government is already overly involved. Like we got, SNAP, assistance for people based on your socioeconomic status, and they're like, why are we doing that already? So I think anything extra or outside of that, Republicans or conservatives just wouldn't allow. It's just like, oh my goodness.
And I also think, and it makes me think about our current sort of climate, right? Or the pandemic and everything. A simple thing as a mask, right? Like we couldn't even get our government to put a national mandate to say everyone's required to wear a mask, and it a lot because of that, right? Like government telling me what to do and all these things, and not wanting that. And I think there's a fine line, and you think about women's reproductive rights, right? Like the government's not gonna tell me what I can do as a woman.
Exactly.
And I think there's all these things that we don't want government to take on, but there's other things that they probably should be taking on, because they can only be changed if policy is enacted. They can only be improved if there's policy enacted. The same way like my reproductive rights can only be protected if there's policies in place to protect them, from others wanting to do things and all these things. It's like there's so much dependent on changing the system when it comes to social issues. So like if we think about food access, which is huge right now, people need access to food, and how that, even before the pandemic was an issue here in Chicago, we know of a lot of efforts of wanting to bring fresh fruits and vegetables to communities.
Exactly.
Like we need to open grocery stores, we need to, but in line of that, we need to educate community about why it's important to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, why it's important to not eat, what would be considered unhealthy and all these things. But nonprofits can only do so much, right? Nonprofits can only do so much. The business world can only do so much. And then where does government come in to help make sure that people have access to fresh fruits and vegetables? And it's not just opening a grocery store, because you can open a grocery store, but if people don't have money to buy the groceries
or to sustain it ain't gonna work.
So what's going to happen? And a lot of that requires support for better education, and education. In order to get more dollars for education, that's dependent, here in Chicago, the public school system is dependent on property taxes a lot of the times for that funding, which is a huge issue, because obviously outside of the city, people are like, oh man, the suburbs have so much better, school system. And for the most part, those school systems are able to, because people are paying higher property taxes, right? Like that's what you'll see. Yet there's a huge sort of not wanting property taxes to go up in the city. And there's a reason behind that, because people are going to lose their homes if property taxes go up. So in order to stop that, there has to be help somewhere, but that help has to come really from a lot of times government entities, to enact and support people to be able to gain access to trade schools and like all these things that should have been ready. And now that I'm talking about it, it sounds like there just has to be more collaboration between government and some of these other institutions.
Well, I feel like pretty much all of these things, yes, I'm holding a cork that's a part of my candle because my nerves got bad because I was trying not to talk while you were talking.
I know, that's why I was like trying to speed up.
Hold it. But I feel like all of what you're saying can be, these are regulations and rules that government and policies have created. So anytime they say, well, we can't do this, or we can only do that, that's based off of policy or regulation that's written down somewhere. Those can be changed. And so to me, I'm like, what we're talking about, and how we're saying, like, yes, we want the government involved in some of our personal life and not all of it. To me, I guess, because it just makes sense to me. And I think as a woman, I don't want somebody telling me if I can have an abortion or not. Like that shouldn't even be up for debate. Like, cause that's not that, like, that's somebody's body. Like that shouldn't even be up for debate. But if somebody needs food, that's different. If somebody's homeless, that's different.
Yeah.
I just feel like, to me, like the things the government should and shouldn't be regulating are very simple. I guess, but obviously they've made it where it's not. And I guess I just don't, understand this whole or the government not want to play a role. But I know, again, so there's a lot of politics tied into this shit. And it's all, even even amongst Democrats and liberals. I mean, there's a lot of I scratch your back, you scratch my back. You help me get this policy, I help you get this policy. And I think that's really what it all comes down to power, who has it, and money, and who doesn't have it. And it's as simple as that. That can be going from red to blue and across the aisle. And I think really with this is just trying to understand. I think better, like you said, collaboration. I think that could help in a certain extent, but I think sometimes the government just need to get off their ass and just do. Cause I'm just saying, like, somebody doesn't have food. To me, that's so simple. Why don't people in your city or your state have food? Like, if kids don't have supplies for school or don't have clothes, why is that so hard to wrap your head around? I just don't, like, if people don't have water, get them water. Like, I guess I just don't. To me, that's black and white. Like, there's no gray in that. And I know people say, oh, there's a lot of gray. I'm sure it is. But to me, it's just really simple. Those are things that people shouldn't have to lose sleep over or worry about, oh, am I going to have money to pay for this prescription? Or can I, or I got to take that extra $20 and put food on the table for my kids. Like, to me, those are things that shouldn't be up for debate. It should just be a part of what you want in your country for people to succeed. All that goes into account when you look at successful countries. And it boggles my mind that America still, even with this fucked up administration, thank God he out, that we're still one of the most powerful countries in the world. And yet across our social services, though, we are failing. Across healthcare, we are failing. Education, we are failing. They have countries that are not even developed as us who have better education than we do. That's sad. Mm-hmm. Why can't we be that? And we're supposed to be one of the greatest countries in the world. We can't even provide people with basic necessities because, they got to figure out how to do it themselves or send them to a nonprofit. They get you some bottled water for what, a week, 2 weeks? And then what you gonna do? You got to go back and figure out how to get water. I mean, it's just like, these things are so mind-boggling to me. Yeah, you're right, girl. This is gonna be a series. It's gonna be a series. I see it.
Because it's such, and obviously, you and I are talking about like what we've seen in our perspective, no pun intended, on all of this. But you bring up such a good point, or something that I've been thinking about. I was thinking about this this past week, was really around basic human rights, right? Like, what are those basic human rights? And I read something or saw something, and I was like, how is it that we can't make healthcare a basic human right? Like, how can we not ensure that everybody has access to the doctor they need to see, the care they need to get, the medication that they need to take? And we make it so hard to get something, right? And and food, another thing. Like, how is that not part of making sure that everybody has access to food? And yes, there's a lot of things that need to change, and there's a lot of red tape and all these gray areas, and it's not all black and white. But at the end of the day, we all should be able to access like fresh fruits and vegetables. Like, that to me, like, look, if y'all want to have a cheeseburger, that's on y'all, like but when it comes to those basic things that we need to survive, like, just staples, like, and a lot of it is, grains and fruits and vegetables and things like this. Like, how is it we just can't, how can not everybody just have the access to housing? You mentioned that too. And I'm like that should be like, there's just plenty. And how do we have so much red tape to just have housing? And this idea of like, well, you can only get it if you just get off your butt and you work hard, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, and this mentality that's very American, I would say, and just being like not supporting each other, not letting government come in and really kind of enact whatever needs to be enacted or change. So you reminded me that was on my mind too, just like what is considered basic human rights. And, and we're so dependent on our Constitution, and our Constitution does not lay out housing, healthcare, or anything of that sort as a basic human right.
Well, it's because the Constitution was written fucking forever ago. The motherfucker needs to be updated, in all honesty. Like, the shit does not fit in today's time. I mean, when I think about it, some of it does, because at the point when all this was going on, the United States was breaking from Great Britain.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like we have to break. Like, so, it's like something needs to happen, for some reconfiguration of the Constitution, because it is a mess. And I don't think anyone has gone in and really looked at, like, as far I'm talking about, like, when I say anyone, government or politics, going back, because they don't want to touch the Constitution. People think it's like this holy grail, and in some ways it is. But shit, I mean, as time evolves, our documents need to be updated. This does not fit.
1776.
Okay. My people, look, the Declaration of Independence, my people are out in the field, honey. That July 4th is not for us, okay? It's not for us. That's not our independence. Hell, they barely want to recognize Juneteenth. I mean, and fuck the Emancipation Proclamation. Abe Lincoln only did that because of financial reasons. Ain't nobody look. So, I mean, it's a mess. And you're so right. Basic human rights. It just seems that we can't even do that here in the United States. And we spend billions of dollars on fucking infrastructure that goes to waste, fucking military. Like, and no disrespect to anybody that's in the military. That's not what I'm saying. But just going into these other countries and using military, who we still trying to fight? Who we fighting now? What's going on? Why we got tanks and aircraft that cost millions of dollars? Now, don't get me wrong, Trump probably would have got our ass into a war, so we might would have needed some of that.
You don't know. He might try to get us into.
He might try to, honey. He might. So we might. But that's the shit that we spend money on. Well, they, not me and you, but the government spends money on here.
Is, like, do you really need to be spending that much money on a yearly basis?
Right.
Like, I get it. Like, I get it every few years. You need to, like, update or, like, whatever. But to do it on a regular basis, and you can't even put that to fund things like SNAP. Like, for me, it's mind-boggling that SNAP funding has to be fought for, I believe, almost like on a yearly basis. Okay, yeah, it passes, but there's no funding for it. But we passed whatever legislation had to be passed or policy, but now we have to fight for funding. I was like, why? Like, that should be automatic. Like, whatever increase or whatever, like, funding should be automatic for things like that. Because I used SNAP years ago when I was had no money, and it helped for a time,
right?
Place, like, for a period of time, is what I'm trying to say, for me to be able to, like, have food. And I appreciated having access to that. I appreciate having access to food pantries and all these things. But the fact that a college educated person in this country had to depend on SNAP because you couldn't have access to a job that afforded you enough money.
Yes.
Like, that's what bothers me to the core of, like, no, because you go to college, you do all these things, you get the experience, you do the internships, and then, and it goes back to, you being a person of color, and the hurdles become much more greater than this, right? And that's when you're dependent on nonprofits filling gaps that, in my mind, have always been like, why can't the government just pass a policy, legislate something so that this nonprofit, because I hear a lot from, like, nonprofits, like, the goal is for this nonprofit to never exist. Like, it's for us to not exist anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the goal. But there are nonprofits out here that have been out here for 100 years.
Girl.
And it's like,
that's a problem.
That's the problem.
That's the problem. That's the problem. I think that by all nonprofits, really, if the point is really to get people up and on their feet, why are we Why is that still an issue? Because people are not up and on their feet. And you have such a good, I've been on food stamps. Sure, my family has been on in the past, and I have no shame to it. I don't mind telling people, but it's like, in order to even qualify for some of those programs, they want you on Skid Row. Like, you can't have anything. I mean, that's literally kind of where I was at the time, and my family. But it was like, I mean, honey, if you make 1 cent over,
yes.
Oh no, you make too much, and you're probably maybe $15,000 a year, maybe. It's like, oh, I mean, honey, they want you impoverished to a T, and that's fucked up. That's really sad. I mean, don't get me wrong, it shouldn't be people out here making maybe 80K, 100K with, out here qualifying for SNAP. That's not what I'm saying. But I mean, they have plenty of people, like you said, they have people who are college educated, advanced degrees, who only make 35, 40K a year. And they may have families to support.
Yeah.
And these are not dumb people. These are very educated, intelligent people.
Student loans
you gotta they have. What'd you say?
You got student loans you gotta pay back. The fact education, I'm sorry, higher education should not be something that puts you
in debt,
into the point of you thinking about, like, I'm just going bankrupt on this. Like, another thing, and a lot of times you have nonprofits stepping in, helping you navigate this sort of land, and then you have, nonprofits giving scholarships to young kids, saying like, oh, here, we're going to give you $2,000 to help you in your education, and filling that gap, that the government could just say, like, hey, if you want to go to, whether it's city college, state, like, whatever it might be, like, I mean, I understand, like, even just the private institutions and all this stuff, but like, the fact that you can't, it should be free if you go to your state university. If you go to your city colleges, it should be free. Like, that should, like, community college should be, like, all these things, like, how is that not free? So to make it accessible for everyone.
Wasn't that during the Obama administration? They wanted to make community college free.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was in the past, but I do. But now, we have Jill in there. She's a professor at a community college. And I know education is going to be top on the list. I think that's something they definitely should continue to fight for, because it is ridiculous. If you go to these other countries across the world, I mean, especially in Europe, I'm not too familiar outside of that. But if you are a citizen, you go to higher education free. I don't understand why the United States, and I don't know, maybe there are people who are doing this. Like you said, this is an episode about research, that really look at some of these other structures in other countries. How are they able to maintain? Like, obviously, they're sending their kids and their people to school for free. They have universal health care. They have food for all. What are they doing that we can try to implement over here? And I know there are researchers out there who are studying this, who are, trying to see more about this. And that's great, but it's not being implemented in the government. But I just really like, why can't they just look at these other models and try to learn from them and see what they're doing right? Like, how are they making it work? I mean, of course, don't even get me started on Northern Europe. I mean, we go to like Sweden and Finland. These are some of the happiest people in the world, although these are very homogeneous societies. But these are some of the, prosperous, happiest people in the world. Why? Like, why? I mean, they have universal health care. They have paid maternal and paternity leave. They have, like, it's not an issue there. And yes, I know they have a smaller number of people than we do in the United States, but then that's where you try to adjust. Like, look at what's happening in these other countries. Why not try to make this happen here? Why is that so difficult and hard to understand? Don't understand people want their kids to be educated. They want their families to be adequately fed. They want housing. They want to have adequate health care. Why is that crazy? Why is that bizarre?
So if you're watching, you're still with us, let us know any of your thoughts in the comments. Like, let us know what you think about why it's so hard for government to step in to the roles that some nonprofits, especially if you have like some articles or knowledge around it deeper than we have. We're going to continue this conversation, and we're going to dig into talk about like education. Like, how is it that education isn't free? What why is our education system built the way that it is that doesn't allow for that to currently happen? But in order to be able to not keep you all here too long in this first episode of this series around nonprofits, let us know your thoughts below. Give us your ideas, suggestions, books, and comments as well, and we will see you. We're going to continue this conversation. This is going to be ongoing, so we will see you at the next episode. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching.
Take care, y'all. Stay safe.